Hey everybody, Wayno here. So we need to have a chat about Postmaster today. Postmasters had a bit of coverage lately. I brought it up a few weeks ago, or maybe 2 months ago now, and Anna seemed to think it was incredibly important, and she was always talking to the postmaster and mentioning the postmaster and telling the postmaster what she was up to, and I could never work out why. So it was time to have a look into it, I thought. Now, I looked and looked and looked, but I could never find and still haven't found uh, one single record which explained why a governance structure needs a postmaster. There was just nothing there. It was a mystery. But I knew that Anna considered it important. So I kept pushing. We got our little group together. We've done a bit of research. So what I'm going to do, I will share a PowerPoint presentation with you, which should explain a bit of history, why the role is so important, and yeah. So let's have a look at that, eh? Uh, share my screen here, don't I? I'm going to share that. Oh, look at that. How good is that? All right. So, a minute, got something in the way here. All right. So here we go. Postmaster land jurisdiction, historical function, controlled public notice. Now, that doesn't sound like much, does it? But there's a lot in that. He controlled public notice, and that was important. Cover that. He established postal venue. That he established and recorded what happened, when, and where, and by whom, all established. And he kept what we call the Book of the Land, which I don't know what we're going to call ours, but it's the public record of notice and proclamations. So back in the day, he kept that. Now, what that meant historically, the postal system became the keeper and communicator of public record. Now, he was the communicator. I want you to remember that word because this is all based around communication. We thought he was the bloke who you gave your letter to post your letter, but it was more than that. It was about communication. Now, without a postmaster, no act, law, election, or order could be verified or grounded on the land. The postmaster was not a commercial function. Postmasters and post officers were jurisdictional instruments. A nation could not declare war or peace without a postmaster. His actual job, so the practical role of the postmaster, let's say he was informed by the General Assembly that a notice had to reach every living man and woman in the country. He would authenticate the notice, and that's important. He was the bloke that authenticated this stuff, authenticated the communication. He would authenticate the notice with his stamp, his letterhead, or by entry into a ledger or whatever other system. He didn't have email, but he would have a letterhead on his email. He would timestamp when he received the notification and when he sent it out. Since he is the only one who can authenticate the notice, and that's important, he's the only one who can authenticate the notice, whoever receives it knows it is true. And notice leads to jurisdiction, leads to standing, leads to legitimacy. So what is notice? The notice is the formal act of governance that brings a matter into the physical world. And I've just realised, just bear with me a bit, I think my little picture up there, getting in the way, which brings a matter into the physical world. Notice establishes lawful awareness and creates the record of communication and fixes the time and the place, the venue, where obligations and rights arise between the people and their governance. So this is important. So notice establishes lawful awareness, creates a record of communication, fixes the venue where obligations and rights arise between the people and their government. Notices how an assembly establishes its authority and how the people retain their opportunity to consent or object. It's how every action becomes legally real on the land. It leads to jurisdiction. So there's three core principles of notice. So notice creates jurisdiction, as I said. Jurisdiction is the lawful authority to speak, decide, act, judge, or govern. Jurisdiction answers the question, who has the right to act here and under what rules? The second core principle, notice establishes standing. Standing is a recognised right to act or speak with authority. You are recognised as a legitimate party in the matter at hand, and you have the lawful right to take action, make claims, issue notices, or speak on behalf of a body, perhaps a body of people, an assembly, or a community. Without standing, nothing that you say or issue has any lawful or public effect. Standing is important. Notice also secures legitimacy. Governance becomes lawful only when its acts are publicly visible and timestamped. This is why assemblies must issue notices, keep records, and communicate publicly. So how does this work in practice? Well, the assembly would issue a notice. This tells the people that an act or a decision exists. It establishes awareness. The notice creates jurisdiction. By serving notice, people now have a lawful connection to the matter. People can act because the assembly has notified you. Then jurisdiction generates standing. People who acknowledge or respond gain the right to be heard. The assembly has the rightful standing to act because it followed due process. Standing then produces legitimacy. We told you, you were aware, you had the right to respond. Our authority stands. This is why assemblies must issue notices, keep records, and communicate publicly. In the past, whoever controlled the post held the power of public notice because it was the lawful process by which orders, proclamations, and court summonses reached the people. So a quick example, let's say on our Tuesday night meeting that the General Assembly, or the Interim General Assembly in our case, has decided we would like to take over Australia Post. And this has been discussed. So this decision affects every living man and woman in the country. So the General Assembly issues a notice. The notice creates jurisdiction. Local assemblies now have a lawful connection to the matter. Your assembly can act because you have been notified. This in turn generates standing. Your local assembly has gained the right to acknowledge or respond to the matter. This produces legitimacy. You were informed, you were aware, you had the right to respond. So what happens if we have no postmaster? Remember, the postmaster's historical role is to fix time and place, fix venue for all notices and public acts. If he becomes just a mail clerk, no one is anchoring the venue. So let's assume that the role was maybe given to some government office or to people who couldn't authenticate the notice. Then notices would have no authoritative point of origin. Assemblies could not prove when or where something was lawfully issued. So with no postmaster, jurisdiction then becomes unstable because the venue cannot be demonstrated. The result, your governance loses legal footing on the land because there is no trustworthy chain of custody. The postmaster historically maintained the official custody of public notices. If the postmaster is not acting as trustee, any document can be questioned. Timestamps and receipt logs may not be accepted. Elections, appointments, and proclamations can be challenged as illegitimate. The result, no certainty of record, meant no certainty of authority. Let's have a look at the vulnerability to takeover or substitution. If you don't control notice, venue, and record, someone else will. There's another word in there which I can't remember. Someone else will. A rival group could claim to issue official notices. External corporate or maritime actors could argue you have no recognised service mechanism. Your assembly can be bypassed because your notices carry no defined authority. Not a very good situation. The governance structure is then open to challenge or replacement. The moment those duties fall under an executive branch, a legislative branch, a commercial service provider, or any office that can be directed, then the sovereignty of notice collapses. And for some reason it won't move on. So consequences now of a postmaster with no trustee. If your postmaster can't authenticate the records, you will suffer the following: loss of lawful venue. Your governance loses legal footing on the land. No trustworthy chain of custody. There will be no certainty of record, so no certainty of authority. No trustee again, you'll suffer fragmented public record. No single authoritative ledger exists. Competing factions can claim different histories. Weak or disputed legitimacy is another thing you'll suffer. Your governance appears symbolic rather than lawful. You'll also suffer vulnerability to takeover or substitution. The governance structure is open to challenge or replacement. So there you go. No postmaster equals the potential challenge to governance. If the postmaster does not serve as trustee of the land, your governance can lose venue, custody, notice, standing, continuity, and legitimacy. And at that point, there's not much left. And without those, a land jurisdiction government cannot function as a government at all. It becomes an informal club with no enforceable public record. Without the postmaster acting as trustee, your land jurisdiction governance loses its anchor of legitimacy, and any outside authority, corporate, maritime, or foreign, can challenge or override your public acts. And with that, I'll stop the share, but I think there's enough in there to let everybody know that we definitely need a postmaster. At one point, I had considered, well, maybe he could just be a part of, instead of being like special, he could just be a part of the governance structure, but that's ruled that out. I also thought, well, why would we need to call him the postmaster if that has implications to some people which aren't good? But we do need to call him the postmaster. You see, the postmaster role on land, sea, and air is a recognised governmental role. The other governments need to recognise, in fact, we need to boast about it, that we do have a legitimate land jurisdiction postmaster. And that's telling people in the same breath that we're in control. We are in control of public notice and communication. And nobody can sort of get in there and start to open up the cracks a bit. All right, I hope this has been incredibly helpful. I'll talk to you soon. I'm out of here.